Hello, WestJet Pilots and other podcast listeners, and welcome to this, a special edition of PIREP, the WestJet Pilots podcast. My name is Captain Desmond Jordan. As usual, I'm your host today, and joined by Captain Chris Von Jones in the sound booth. As I mentioned, today is a special edition of the PIREP podcast. Today we'll be looking at or discussing the award by arbitrator Gedeloff and how it kind of affects our group and what the feelings are of our MEC. With that in mind, we do have today with us Captain Bern Lewall, our MEC chair. Bern, how are you today?
Doing okay, Des. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us here today. We both know that this award is relatively important to our pilot group and on a greater note, the company going forward. As you're well aware, there are a lot of different feelings about this award in the group, none of them extremely positive. And I just thought that maybe you'd like to have an opportunity to discuss the greater MEC's feelings on this award as well and where we might be going from here.
Yeah, thanks, Des, for joining me this morning. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and our pilot group as a whole. When I opened the ruling last Wednesday, I was absolutely shocked. I wasn't expecting a home run, but this was almost a gut punch, and I feel for my pilots because we've got a relatively small group of our pilots that are almost unaffected by the ruling, but the vast majority of our pilot group is affected by this ruling, and that is not the way I was expecting this ruling to go. That being said, I want our pilots and I want the Sunwing pilots that will be WestJet pilots in another 8 to 12 months. I need them to understand that this is not something we wanted. It's not something the Sunwing pilots wanted. It was forced on us by Onyx.
Typically in an arbitration, it's my understanding that the arbitrator's job is to ensure that both sides feel an equivalent level of equity or inequity. How do you think we made out in that case?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me, it is, because an arbitrator's job is to balance the equities that both companies or pilot groups bring to the table. And I think in this case, he also had the obligation to create a list and give us a list that would ensure a functional pilot group coming out of this. And I fear that there's a possibility in this case that that's not the case. Morale is going to be low, and that will lead to potentially some productivity issues as well as CRM issues in the flight deck. I don't think he really balanced the ruling in the finality of this. But getting back to your question about the equities, I think we all know that WestJet pilots, we bring a superior contract to this. We bring work. We bring a financially stable company to the merger. Sunwing, they brought a vacation flying out of Eastern Canada down south. Those were the equities that the arbitrator had to balance. And in my estimation, when I opened it up, it was a hard pill to swallow because I don't think he necessarily did that.
So I understand that Sunwing brings approximately 500 pilots and around 18 airplanes. What kind of ratios does WestJet bring into this situation?
Yeah, so we bring about 1,950 pilots and about 135 planes. So the ratio is unbalanced in this case. But look, mergers are always painful, but I've always thought that pain has to be shared. And in this case, I don't think the pain was shared equally.
So Bernie, where do you see where some of these inequities are?
Yeah, Des, I think some of the equities, it starts with what they gain being a part of the WestJet Pilot Group, and they gain our CA2. It's better wages by up to 24%, and they also gain scope protections. They also gain a career airline, an airline that they can stay around for the rest of their career. But on top of that, now with this award, they gain 2 years on average seniority. And that to us is unacceptable. They've gained everything and seniority on top of it.
So in just flipping through this ruling, it looks like the arbitrator has awarded an average 2-year seniority imbalance, sometimes up to 4-year seniority imbalance on that pilot list. How do you think that affects things going forward?
It's a good question, Des. Now, again, I think the arbitrator had an obligation to create a functional pilot group out of this seniority list integration. And I think there's a risk here. we have pilots that are way out of seniority. That's going to affect the morale. The morale will affect the productivity of the airline, and the morale will affect potentially CRM and the flight deck.
And affecting CRM can obviously affect safety in the flight deck.
That's a concern.
A big concern. So, Bern, what role did ALPA play in the outcome?
That was part of the negotiations for CA2. The last thing we wanted to do is get rid of the 1B scale, which was swoop, and replace it with a swoop 2.0, which would have been the Sunwing group. So we negotiated LOU 20, which describes the merge of the two pilot groups. And again, I have to reiterate, Des, that having two separate companies was not in the best interest of our pilots. That would have been used to whipsaw us against them for years to come. Look, Des, we had a great set of volunteers, and we had really good outside legal counsel that gave us the best legal advice we could get. Ultimately, this is not a negotiation, it's an arbitration, and the end result is determined by one individual.
So, Bernie, could you give us a brief explanation of what the arbitration process actually was?
So very briefly, Des, we had 10 days set aside with the arbitrator. The first 4 to 5 days of those were really taken up with the company and the arbitrator trying to figure out a transition process to get the Sunwing pilots over to the WestJet Pilot group. The reason that's significant is because that is time that we wanted to spend with the arbitrator pushing forward our viewpoints. And that was somewhat truncated due to that. And then the 2 days after that were arbitration. The final 2 days, the arbitrator declared that he did not need to hear any more arguments. So he removed those from our schedule and he used those days to write the award.
And Bernie, what would your feeling be on the arguments that our merger committee presented and how they presented them?
Des Francis and his team went into the initial mediation with a very aggressive stance to the point where the arbitrator said our position was unacceptable. We persisted with very aggressive arguments all the way through the process, Des.
It seems apparent to the group that he did not come around and understand our frustrations. So the question from the group now might be, where do we go from this point?
I feel equally frustrated with the award as presented, Des, and we do have a couple options going forward. One is what's called a reconsideration of the award, and the second would be a judicial review.
What are those things?
So a reconsideration is a motion that would be filed in front of the CRB, and that is the Canadian Industrial Relations Board, for them to take another look at the award as given and decide whether it stands or whether they put it back to another arbitrator for review.
Okay, and how does that differ from a judicial review?
A judicial review is where we actually file with the Federal Court of Appeal and get in front of a federal judge. And now that in that case there, he's going to be looking for procedural errors in the award.
Okay. So those are two legal methods available to our group. What is the likelihood of success with either one of those?
I don't want to give percentages here, Des, but let me just say it's a high bar, and the onus on us is to prove that we have a case in either of those circumstances.
Okay.
Des, no matter how high the bar is set, our pilots need to know that we are working on their behalves, and we will explore every opportunity. To that end, I have instructed our counsel to explore the merits of a reconsideration.
Are there any risks associated with pursuing a reconsideration or judicial review?
There are, Des, and probably the biggest risk is that we get sent back to another arbitrator, different than the one we have right now, and we get a worse result. That is always a possibility out of a reconsideration.
Fair enough. Well, thank you, Bernie. I was just wondering, I mean, I understand, or we all understand, this is a very busy and stressful time for the association. Are there any final comments that you'd just like to send out to the pilot group before we wrap up?
Again, Des, I'm frustrated with the award, just like the rest of the majority of our pilot group is. Rest assured, we are exploring all avenues. And again, I want to acknowledge this can be a stressful time. There's lots of distractions out there. I want my pilots to stay focused and professional. And most importantly, I want you guys to stay safe.
Well said, Bernie. Thank you very much. I couldn't have said it better myself. Again, thank you to you for joining us here today. And I think that's going to wrap it up for today on this edition of PIREP, the WestJet Pilots podcast. We appreciate you all taking the time to listen. We know how important these issues are to you. And we will endeavor to keep you all well informed as we go forward. Look forward to more podcasting in the not too distant future as well. Stay informed, stay on top of those communications. We appreciate the engagement and the feedback that we're getting. It's helping move things forward. With that said, thank you for listening to this edition of PIREP, the WestJet Pilots podcast.